The show was running smoothly that Tuesday afternoon at the Ellen DeGeneres Show Studios. Ellen had just finished her opening monologue and was preparing to welcome her guest, comedian Kevin Hart, who was promoting his upcoming nationwide comedy tour. The audience was energetic, as they always were when a popular comedian was scheduled to appear, and Ellen could feel the anticipation building in the studio. "Ladies and gentlemen," Ellen announced with her signature enthusiasm, "please welcome one of the funniest people on the planet, Kevin Hart." Kevin bounded onto the stage with his characteristic energy, immediately working the crowd with his animated gestures and infectious smile. At 5'4", he might have been one of the shorter guests Ellen had hosted, but his presence filled the entire studio. After the customary hug and wave to the audience, Kevin settled into the guest chair, ready to promote his tour and share some laughs with Ellen and her viewers. "Kevin, you're about to embark on another massive comedy tour," Ellen began. "What can audiences expect this time around?" "Ellen, I'm telling you, this tour is going to be special," Kevin replied, his voice already building to the animated delivery that had made him a household name. "I'm calling it Laughter Through Life because, life keeps happening to all of us, and sometimes the only way to deal with it is to laugh. I want people to come to my shows and forget about their problems for a couple hours." Ellen nodded, appreciating the genuine sentiment behind Kevin's comedy philosophy. "You've always talked about how comedy helped you through difficult times. What made you want to focus on that theme for this tour?" Kevin's expression became more thoughtful, though his energy remained high. "Man, Ellen, I've learned over the years that everybody's going through something. Whether it's family stuff, work stress, health issues, money problems, life is hard for everybody. But when people come to my shows, they're looking for an escape. They want to laugh until their sides hurt and remember that joy is still possible." As Kevin spoke, the cameras occasionally panned across the audience, showing people nodding and smiling in recognition of what he was describing. It was during one of these audience shots that the camera lingered for just a moment on an older man sitting in the third row, who was watching Kevin with an intensity and familiarity that seemed different from the typical audience reaction. Robert Martinez, 78 years old, sat in his carefully ironed button-down shirt with his hands folded in his lap, listening to every word Kevin said with the attention of someone who had heard these philosophies develop over years of performances. What the cameras didn't capture, and what no one in the studio could have known, was that Robert had been attending Kevin Hart's shows for nearly a decade, driving hundreds of miles when necessary, saving up money from his retirement pension to buy tickets to every tour that came within reasonable distance of his home in San Bernardino. "So, Kevin," Ellen continued, "you've been doing comedy for what, almost 20 years now? Do you ever think about those early days when you were performing for much smaller crowds?" Kevin's face lit up with nostalgia. "Oh, absolutely. I think about those days all the time. Back when I was performing in small comedy clubs, sometimes there'd be 15 people in the audience, and half of them would be on their phones. But you know what kept me going? It was always the people who really got it, who understood what I was trying to do. There would always be someone in the crowd who was really listening, really laughing at the right moments, and that person would make the whole show worth it." In the audience, Robert's eyes began to well up slightly as he listened to Kevin describe those early days. Robert remembered them too. He had been there for many of those smaller shows, sometimes driving 2 hours each way to sit in comedy clubs that smelled like stale beer and cigarette smoke, watching a young comedian work out material that would eventually make him famous. "The thing is," Kevin continued, "comedy isn't just about telling jokes. It's about connecting with people, making them feel less alone. When I see someone in the audience who's really with me, who's laughing not just because everyone else is laughing, but because they genuinely connect with what I'm saying, that's when I know I'm doing my job right." Ellen sensed there was more depth to Kevin's perspective than usual. It sounds like you really pay attention to your audience members individually. I do, Ellen. I really do. After all these years, I can spot the difference between polite laughter and genuine connection. There are people who come to my shows multiple times, and I start to recognize faces. There's this one older gentleman who's been coming to my shows for years now, and I swear his laugh is the most genuine thing I've ever heard. I don't know who he is, but whenever I see him in the audience, I know it's going to be a good show. Ellen's producer, who had been watching the interview unfold, suddenly had an idea. Through her earpiece, she heard her team asking if they had anyone in today's audience who had been to multiple Kevin Hart shows. After a quick consultation with the audience coordinator, the response came back immediately. There's a man in the third row named Robert Martinez. Our pre-show survey says he's attended over 30 Kevin Hart shows in the past 10 years. Ellen, receiving this information through her earpiece, felt her heart skip a beat. She had built her career on creating meaningful connections between people, and she could sense that something special was about to happen. Kevin, Ellen said, her voice taking on a tone that regular viewers would recognize as the signal that the show was about to shift into something deeper. What would you say to someone who has been supporting your comedy for years, even from the very beginning? I would say thank you, Kevin responded immediately, his sincerity evident. I would want to know their story, you know? What keeps bringing them back? What do they get from the experience? Because honestly, those people, the ones who've been with me from the start, they're the reason I can do what I do. Ellen looked directly at Robert in the audience. Well, Kevin, it turns out we might have someone here today who fits exactly that description. The studio cameras turned to focus on Robert, who suddenly found himself displayed on the big screens around the studio. His expression showed surprise and a touch of embarrassment at being singled out, but also a deep pride in being recognized. Sir, Ellen called out, could you please stand up? Robert slowly stood, his aged hands gripping the arm of his chair for support. He was clearly overwhelmed by suddenly being the center of attention in a room of 300 people and a national television audience. What's your name? Ellen asked. Robert Martinez, he replied, his voice soft but carrying clearly through the studio microphone system. Kevin's head turned immediately toward Robert, and Ellen could see recognition dawning in the comedian's eyes. Wait a minute, Kevin said, standing up from his chair and walking toward the edge of the stage to get a better look at Robert. Sir, have we met before? Robert's face broke into a smile that seemed to light up his entire being. You probably don't remember me specifically, Mr. Hart, but I've been to 32 of your shows over the past 10 years. The studio audience reacted with surprise and appreciation, but Kevin's reaction was something else entirely. He stood there for a moment, clearly processing what he had just heard. 32 shows? Kevin repeated. Sir, that's incredible. You've been to more of my shows than some of my own family members. Ellen could sense that there was more to Robert's story, and her instincts told her to dig deeper. Robert, can you tell us what's kept you coming back to Kevin's shows for all these years? Robert looked down for a moment, then back up at Kevin, his eyes now clearly filled with emotion. My wife Dorothy has Alzheimer's disease, Robert said, his voice steady despite the pain evident in his words. She was diagnosed 7 years ago, and I've been her full-time caregiver ever since. Taking care of someone you love who's losing their memory, it's the hardest thing I've ever had to do. The studio fell completely silent. Ellen felt her heart breaking as she listened to Robert's story, and she could see that Kevin was equally moved. For the past 10 years, every few months when Mr. Hart's tours would come to Southern California, I would arrange for Dorothy's sister to stay with her for one evening, and I would drive to the show. Those 2 or 3 hours of laughter, they were the only times I could forget about the sadness, the confusion, The fear of watching the woman I've loved for 53 years slowly disappear. Robert paused, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. Dorothy used to love to laugh. Before the Alzheimer's, she had the most beautiful laugh you've ever heard. When I would come home from Kevin's shows and try to tell her about the funny parts, sometimes, just for a moment, I could see a flicker of the old Dorothy in her eyes. Those moments, they kept me going. Kevin was visibly emotional now, and Ellen could see that he was struggling to maintain his composure. "Sir," Kevin said, his voice softer than Ellen had ever heard it, "what you just described, that's exactly why I do what I do. The fact that my comedy could give you even a few hours of relief from something so difficult, that means more to me than any award or review ever could." Ellen knew she was witnessing something special, but she sensed there was more to Robert's story. "Robert," she said gently, "tell us more about Dorothy. How is she doing now?" Robert's smile was sad but filled with love. "She's in the late stages now. She doesn't recognize me most days, doesn't speak much anymore. But I promised her 53 years ago that I would love her in sickness and in health. And I meant it. I take care of her at home because I can't bear the thought of her being in a facility where strangers would be caring for her." "That must be incredibly challenging," Ellen observed. "It is," Robert admitted. "I haven't been to one of Kevin's shows in 8 months because Dorothy can't be left alone anymore, and I can't afford professional care. But when I heard he was going to be on your show today, I arranged for my neighbor to sit with Dorothy for a few hours so I could be here. I just wanted to see him one more time, to hear that laugh that has gotten me through the darkest period of my life." Kevin walked down the steps from the stage and made his way into the audience toward Robert. When he reached the older man, he extended his hand, which Robert shook with obvious emotion. "Mr. Martinez," Kevin said, "I need you to know something. You've been more than just an audience member to me. You've been an inspiration, even when I didn't know your name or your story. Your laughter, your support, your presence at all those shows, you helped me become the comedian I am today." Ellen could see that many audience members were crying now, moved by this unexpected connection between performer and fan. "Kevin," Ellen called out, "I think Robert deserves to know how much his loyalty has meant to you." Kevin nodded, still holding Robert's hand. "Sir, when I was starting out, when I was playing to small crowds and wondering if I was ever going to make it, there were nights when I would see your face in the audience, and I knew that at least one person was really listening, really connecting with what I was trying to say. You have no idea how many times your laughter gave me the confidence to keep going." Robert was crying openly now. "Mr. Hart, your comedy gave me life during the hardest years of my life. I should be thanking you." Ellen knew this was the moment she had been building toward. The moment when she could use her platform to create something meaningful. "Kevin," she said, "Robert has been taking care of Dorothy by himself for 7 years. That's an incredible act of love and dedication." Kevin looked back toward Ellen, then at Robert, and Ellen could see an idea forming in his mind. "Ellen," Kevin said, "can I do something?" "Of course." Kevin turned back to Robert. "Sir, I'm about to go on a nationwide tour, and I want to do something for you. Every city I perform in over the next year, I'm going to dedicate part of my show to you and Dorothy. I'm going to tell your story because people need to hear about the kind of love and dedication you've shown." The audience applauded enthusiastically, but Kevin wasn't finished. "But more than that," Kevin continued, "I want to make sure you can keep taking care of Dorothy the way she deserves. My foundation is going to cover the cost of professional in-home care for Dorothy, so you can have help when you need it, and so you never have to worry about being able to afford the care she needs." Robert looked like he might collapse from emotion. "Mr. Hart, I don't know how to—" "Sir," Kevin interrupted gently, You've given me 10 years of support when I needed it most. Let me give you something back." Ellen stood up from her chair, knowing that she needed to add something to this moment. "Robert," she said, "Kevin is right. Your devotion to Dorothy is extraordinary, and you shouldn't have to face this challenge alone. In addition to the in-home care Kevin is providing, my foundation is going to ensure that you and Dorothy have access to the best possible medical care and any resources you need to maintain her quality of life." Ellen paused, looking around the studio at an audience that was completely absorbed in this moment. "But there's one more thing. Robert, you mentioned that Dorothy used to love to laugh. Would it be okay if we brought some laughter to her?" Robert looked confused but nodded. "Kevin, would you be willing to do something unprecedented? Would you consider doing a private show for Dorothy, right in Robert and Dorothy's living room?" Kevin's face lit up immediately. "Ellen, I would be honored. When can we do it?" Robert was speechless, overwhelmed by the generosity being shown to him and his wife. "We can arrange it for this weekend," Ellen said. "Kevin will come to your home, and we'll bring a small camera crew to capture Dorothy's reaction to some gentle, loving comedy." When the show ended and the cameras stopped rolling, Kevin spent another 30 minutes with Robert, learning more about Dorothy, their life together, and the specific challenges of caring for someone with Alzheimer's. Ellen watched from across the studio as the famous comedian and the devoted husband formed a genuine friendship based on mutual respect and shared understanding of what it means to bring joy to others during difficult times. 3 days later, Kevin Hart arrived at Robert and Dorothy Martinez's modest home in San Bernardino. Dorothy, 76 years old and in the late stages of Alzheimer's, sat in her favorite chair in the living room, sometimes looking around with curiosity, sometimes seeming to retreat into her own world. Kevin sat on the floor next to Dorothy's chair and spoke to her gently, not as a performer trying to get laughs, but as a friend sharing stories. He talked about his own family, about everyday observations that might resonate with someone from Dorothy's generation, and occasionally he would share a gentle, family-friendly joke. For most of the visit, Dorothy seemed only minimally aware of Kevin's presence. But near the end of his time there, Kevin told a story about his relationship with his own grandmother, and something in Dorothy's expression changed. She looked directly at Kevin, and for just a moment her eyes seemed clearer than they had in months. "You're funny," she said quietly, and she smiled. It was the first time Dorothy had spoken a complete sentence in weeks, and the first time she had smiled in longer than Robert could remember. Kevin later said it was the most meaningful audience reaction he had ever received. The segment that aired on Ellen's show a week later showed highlights of Kevin's visit with Dorothy, and the response from viewers was overwhelming. The show received thousands of messages from families dealing with Alzheimer's, from caregivers feeling isolated and overwhelmed, and from people who were inspired by Robert's devotion and Kevin's compassion. More importantly, Kevin kept his promise. At every show during his year-long tour, he dedicated several minutes to talking about Robert and Dorothy, about the importance of supporting family caregivers, and about finding ways to bring joy into the lives of people dealing with difficult circumstances. Robert continued to care for Dorothy at home, now with professional help funded by Kevin's foundation and medical support arranged through Ellen's resources. He was able to attend 3 more Kevin Hart shows that year, each time knowing that Dorothy was being well cared for in his absence. Dorothy passed away peacefully 18 months later, with Robert holding her hand. At her funeral, Kevin Hart delivered a eulogy about a woman he had met only once, but whose love story with Robert had touched his heart deeply. He spoke about how Dorothy's laughter, which Robert had described so beautifully, lived on in the joy that Robert continued to bring to others even during his grief. Robert's story became a symbol for family caregivers everywhere, proof that love takes many forms and that sometimes the greatest acts of heroism happen quietly in living rooms and bedrooms where one person dedicates their life to caring for another. Kevin Hart's comedy never changed fundamentally, but his perspective on his role as an entertainer deepened. He began incorporating more stories about real people he had met, more observations about the challenges ordinary families face, and more recognition that laughter is not just entertainment, but medicine for people dealing with life's hardest moments. And Ellen learned once again that the most powerful segments on her show were never the ones that were carefully scripted, but the ones that happened when real human connection broke through the barriers of celebrity, performance, and television production to reveal the simple truth that we all need each other, that everyone has a story worth hearing, and that sometimes the most meaningful moments happen when we stop performing and start caring.